Welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast, where we explore the kind of thinking we need to navigate a positive way forward. I'm your host, Morag, permaculture educator and global ambassador, filmmaker, eco-villager, food forester, mother, practivist, and all-round lover of thinking, communicating, and acting regeneratively. For a long time, it's been clear to me that to shift trajectory to a thriving one-planet way of life, we first need to shift our thinking. The way we perceive ourselves in relation to nature, self, and community is the core. So this is true now more than ever, and even the way change is changing. Unprecedented changes are happening all around us at a rapid pace. So how do we make sense of this? To know which way to turn, to know what action to focus on, so our efforts are worthwhile and nourishing and are working towards resilience, regeneration, and reconnection. What better way to make sense than to join together with others in open, generative conversation? In this podcast, I'll share conversations with my friends and colleagues, people who inspire and challenge me in their ways of thinking, connecting, and acting. These wonderful people are thinkers, doers, activists, scholars, writers, leaders, farmers, educators, people whose work informs permaculture and spark the imagination of what a post-COVID, climate-resilient, socially just future could look like. Their ideas and projects help us to make sense in this changing world, to compost and digest the ideas, and to nurture the fertile ground for new ideas, connections, and actions. Together we'll open up conversations in the world of permaculture design, regenerative thinking, community action, earth repair, eco-literacy, and much more. I can't wait to share these conversations with you. Over the last 3 decades of personally making sense of the multiple crises we face, I always return to the practical and positive world of permaculture, with its ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share. I've seen firsthand how adaptable and responsive it can be in all contexts, from urban to rural, from refugee camps to suburbs. It helps people make sense of what's happening around them and to learn accessible design tools to shape their habitat positively and to contribute to cultural and ecological regeneration. This is why I've created the Permaculture Educators Program, to help thousands of people to become permaculture teachers everywhere through an interactive online dual certificate of permaculture design and teaching. We sponsor global perma-youth programs, women's self-help groups in the Global South, and teens in refugee camps. So anyway, this podcast is sponsored by the Permaculture Education Institute and our Permaculture Educators Program. If you'd like to find more about permaculture, I've created a 4-part permaculture video series to explain what permaculture is and also how you can make it your livelihood as well as your way of life. We'd love to invite you to join our wonderfully inspiring, friendly and supportive global learning community. So I welcome you to share each of these conversations, and I'd also like to suggest you create a local conversation circle to explore the ideas shared in each show and discuss together how this makes sense in your local community and environment. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I meet and speak with you today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. My guest today on this episode of Sense Making in a Changing World podcast is none other than the legend Darren Doherty, who's a 5th-generation land manager and trainer from the Bendigo region of Victoria, Australia. He's an absolute regenerative farm innovator. He's also the writer of the Regrarians Handbook and a filmmaker with his wife Lisa Heenan of Polyfaces. So Darren has been involved in the design and development of well over 3,000 projects, mostly broadacre projects on 6 continents. He integrates permaculture with Keyline and carbon farming and all kinds of different sorts of regenerative agriculture approaches. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined here today by Darren. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Darren here on the show today to talk about Regrarians and his approach to permaculture design, especially on this broad scale that he works in. This is actually the first time that we've ever had the chance to sit down and have a chat, and I just loved it. So I hope you enjoy listening in. Well, welcome to the show, Darren. It's so great to have you here.
I don't know that we've met before, have we?
We have met before. My gosh, it must have been Atherton Tablelands Permaculture Conference, whenever that was, in
11 years ago.
Something
I remember
like
it
that.
well.
Yeah.
There was lots of people and it was a good vibe, wasn't it?
Oh, it was great. That was just that was fantastic. So I think that was the one and only time that I've ever met. But from being in the world of permaculture and seeing your work for a very long time, I've always looked to see what you're doing as being, and just the way you are as being one of those big picture thinkers, big landscape thinkers with a global vision, and hugely inspiring the work that you're doing. So I'm so glad that you've taken the time out of your hugely busy schedule to sit and have a chat with me today.
It's not too bad.
Absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity.
So for those listening, Darren Doherty is the founder of something called Regrarians. And so maybe that's something that we could just begin with right there. I mean, there's so many things that you do, but maybe let's just start there. What is Regrarians, and what does even that word mean to you? Because it's a beautiful word.
Oh, thank you. It was a word that came on the rebound. It was sort of like I broke up a love affair with a few other characters, which was called Regen Ag, which was another brand I came up with. And when that went, I went, oh, damn, that's such a good brand. I better come up with a new one. And it took a while. So I developed this platform, which was based or adapted from P.A. Yeoman's scale of permanence, which at the time I was calling the Regen 10, which is sort of the best, which is a shitty brand and the best I could come up with. And I don't know. I don't actually have the point. I've got it in one of my notebooks somewhere where I was doodling on a plane or whatever you do at some point, and I went, oh, that could work. And so it's a portmanteau of regenerative and agrarian, because ultimately, when we look at a lot of the people that we're working with. As I put it, I've just finished a webinar with our Rex, and people are in a transition to what I call now a regenerative agroecology. So, they want it. They are wherever they are right now, and they want to go somewhere. So, it's sort of like a restart as an agrarian, because being an agrarian as such over the history of agrarianism has not necessarily been a great thing. It's not resulted in fantastic planetary outcomes. And so it's another, let's reboot that. Let's reboot what that actually means. What is our relationship with land management and so on mean? So
who are the main people that you're...
Yeah, it was just one of those things that came out of a brainstorm, I suppose, and off it went from there.
Yeah. So I was just, sorry for butting in there. I was just going to ask you, who are the main people that you find that you're working with? Because I know that it is more the bigger landscapes, isn't it, that you're working with?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, as most of us would know, that most of the farmers and agricultural production on the planet, I can't remember the figure, it might be over 70% or so, is with people who have land, who are managing landscapes of less than 2 to 5 hectares. They're not really who we work with, and most of the people, like you say, are people. Well, our audience is mostly those of either of colonised nations, and including here in Australia and other places like Mexico and Chile and Argentina and Brazil and so on, and then all across Europe and the United States and Canada and so on. So it's those places, and most of those places are not. Most of the people are people who have reasonable amounts of land. So, and usually 50 plus hectares. So we sort of go from 50 to about 100. I think I think we've got a few people at the moment on our books who are about 150 to 200,000 hectares. So everything in between that. But yeah, you're right. It's mostly for that. I wouldn't say it's partly intent, but also partly how it's gone.
Isn't that where you grew up on a farm?
Yeah, I
well,
did, but I didn't grow up on a big farm, so it was a relatively small one close to Bendigo. So, but it's just like, I suppose, like here in Australia, if you're going to be a so-called productive or economically productive, viable person in agricultural enterprise in agriculture, there's a scale to which that can occur. And so, of course, in my exposure to the permaculture movement, that suggests that certainly you can be productive as a unit on a smaller acreage, but would that generally make a living for you as well is a whole other question. And I suppose that's the big distinction I would make with a lot of people that would be, say, classically in permaculture versus the world that I kind of occupy, which is, got the commercial part of it.
Yeah,
which makes it difficult, which then creates the scale that we work with. Yeah.
I was reading in your kind of vision statement there that you're working towards creating the potential for people to be informed about the regenerative economy, and then went on to talk about other things. So really it is, the agriculture is a subset of this broader regenerative economy that you're talking about. You just want to speak about that, like a bit about what is your global vision? Because I know you work around the world and you have, like what you're doing is not just about consulting to farms. There's something behind that, which is what drives you and what is your, I guess, the core purpose of your work, isn't it?
Well, it's a love of the planet. I mean, again, as a permaculturalist, and I'm sort of not the permaculturalist that I used to be, and I've said to quite a few people, I don't do permaculture anymore. It's not that I don't do it, but I don't do it in the way that some people are, where it's their methodology. It's like, for me, it's one of the methodologies, which really goes to, in part, what David Holmgren said, that nature is an equal opportunity employer, and with that, from a methodological perspective, the problems of the world aren't going to be solved by one methodology, and there's lots and lots of things that people can do, and I suppose that's it. It's the love of this world. And all of the natural systems that exist within it, and trying to have them so there's more of them, because as a naturally inquisitive person who loves all of that, I want to see more of it. Luckily, as a boy who didn't leave Victoria until I was 18, and that was to go over the river, which I can't even do now because I'm going to that illegal state of New South Wales, that I have been pretty lucky to have travelled as much as I have and seen the things that I have, so that part of me is kind of nurtured. But, we're just trying to see everything realise its potential. I mean, there's that great statement in the Judeo-Christian Abrahamic tradition of, life begets life. And, that's really what we're seeing here, whether that's someone themselves being in a current position, and then us helping them to self-determine within a community context the whole future for them, which is a new life. Or whether that's just seeing an ecosystem turn around from being in a relatively poor state to one that's abundant, as it were, is amazing. And that's what drives me, I suppose, is being able to see that, being a good Earth citizen who wants to see this place with, you just think, my God, all the stuff that's been pulled together as far as the chance of Earth, if you like, depending on what your belief system is. But the chance of all of this coming together with all, the fact that you can sit there with a drosera, is it a dross? What do you call it? That plant living beside you there is just that's phenomenal. that's outside of all of this. So, yeah, that's what really drives me. It's pretty simple, really.
Yep. So you mentioned that, permaculture is one of the sort of suite of methodologies that you draw on in the work that you do. And you also mentioned P.A. Yeoman's work as well. What are some of the other things that that have inspired you and that you've been able to sort of stand on the shoulders of in order to create your model?
Yeah, again, I'll probably go back to the start. The farm that my grandfather and my grandmother and grandfather developed was inspired by P.A. Yeoman's work, as so many people were, but not directly. So that when I first talked to my grandfather about P.A. Yeoman's, he goes, "Who's he?" But then, and this is the power of his work, of Yeoman's body of work, is that his keyline work of the 40s, 50s, 60s was so powerful that people were doing his work without knowing it was actually from that source, which I think is incredible. And you could look to that with some of the permaculture stuff, which has permeated into the land care movement and vice versa and so on. So there's a whole lot of, Andre Vasson's work in rational grazing has morphed into all of these other things where people don't know the source, and on it goes. So P.A. Yeoman's work is really big, and it's sort of, when I started out, I was just looking for whatever was available. Like, I didn't find out about permaculture until about 1992-3. Up to that point, I was in, Fukuoka was what turned all of this on for me when I was about 18, and a mate gave me this book. And I read it, and then I bought the other two.
Which one did you get first, One Straw Revolution or the
One Straw Revolution?
Yeah, right.
And my friends have unfortunately passed now, but there was whoa. I took the doing nothing thing in a different direction, but and a predilection for big cigarettes with different ingredients. But all of that had its phase. But and then the Keyline thing, and then permaculture came along, and then holistic management came along, all fairly early. I put to one side holistic management thanks to a conversation, or no thanks to a conversation with Bill Mollison in his library one day at Tyalgum. I was standing there with him, and I pulled this book out called Holistic Resource Management, the first edition by Savory, and Bill just happened to be beside me, and he said, "Put that away. That stuff's destroying Africa." And I went, "Oh, okay." and that was that. And I didn't question until later, well, why did he have the bloody book in his library then, And do
you know why he thought that?
Well, there was a narrative going around at the time, which you see that in videos. If you look at the Global Gardener, for example, he's in Africa and he's saying that people put fences everywhere, which is all right. But that had nothing to do. That was just rank colonial pastoralism. It had nothing to do with holistic management, planned grazing. It was quite very, very different. So I think he just equated the two, and perhaps to a person of similar age and a similar, wouldn't say similar lineage, but another person on the scene, and perhaps it was the ecosystem working instead of the ecosystem. Anyway, so those sort of things came together, and it wasn't until we did the tour. We did a tour in 2007 of the world, which went for 13 months. And while we were and I called that my interview with the planet, because at that stage I'd done a lot of work in southeastern Australia, doing a lot of contracting work, and we did go to Vietnam for a few years to work over there, but pretty well everything up to that point had been in one part of the world, just doing design and development. And I had, like I said, there was the permaculture, there was the Keyline, which, as you know, Keyline and permaculture are very close, and then the whole farm planning stuff that I learnt from the University of Melbourne, and a few other bits and bobs, and that was pretty well the frame. And then when I started to travel around, or we started to travel around, it exposed me to a whole range of other things that other people were doing around the planet, some of which were a version of convergent evolution as philosophies. So I saw Bilsey Dyke's work in Arizona and New Mexico, which was an analogue of what Peter Andrews was doing in Australia, right? Very similar pathways of, might say riparian restoration, but developed without knowing each other, right? So there was all of that, and meeting Elaine Ingham and so on, and Paul Stamets and meeting him. I got to meet a whole lot of these really cool people and understand a whole, and probably most powerfully, the late Eugenio Gras, when I went to Mexico and started working with him, and that whole world of Latin American soil biology and biofertilizers and all that campesino empowerment. And I remember, again, on another plane, I was sitting there and I was doodling, and I just put all these circles together, and each circle was kind of like a Facebook disc, like a profile, but it was each of the methodologies. And I was just thinking, wow, there are so many methodologies that are out there, and that started to really frame in my mind the integration of methodologies, which to that point and still a lot of people don't do. They sort of stay, like I call it, like you have your God, and it's sort of like, which I think philosophically plays into the fact that many of us are Judeo-Christian, follow the Abrahamic traditions or other religious traditions, which are largely monotheistic. And so we stick loyally to that tradition and the sect within that tradition. And I think that carries through with the methodologies that we follow as well. We're sort of averse to not just be a permaculturalist and not just be a biodynamicist or whatever, or not just be a holistic manager. And that's just not the way the world works. The world, the array of solutions or problems that we have out there need some really, really integrated solutions, which are not necessarily from one band.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've been having some really great conversations with a lot of different people recently, which is one of the reasons why I sort of love the possibility of having podcast conversations about crossing into different worlds and so I had a chat with Stuart Andrews, Peter Andrews' son, recently. Yeah. And so that's something that you do a lot of when you're going out into landscape, thinking about hydration, isn't it? I mean, that's kind of... So when you go out into a landscape, what's the first thing that you start to do, and where do you begin to turn around incredibly degraded landscapes? Like, what do you see, and what do you start to imagine when you enter into that space?
Well, it's not just a matter of seeing; it's also a matter of feeling. It's a lot of the time these days I don't actually get to go.
No,
but that's okay to an extent, because a lot of my role now is to helping people to learn these things themselves, to becoming more sensory. So perhaps I'll start with myself and I'll look at that way. But myself, when I go out into the landscape, it's all sensory. It may be, and it's often when you're doing it for someone else or with someone else on someone else's landscape or another landscape, that it's a 1 or 2 day affair. It might even be a 1 or 2 hour affair, and that's it. And so it's not, and therefore you're just taking a really small sample of all of the permutations. So it'll be, feeling the wind, it'll be feeling the energy of the place in terms of how it radiates, all of that, what reflections it has. I mean, we're pretty sensory organisms, which is cool. And then from a site perspective, I'll be looking first off at the soil surface. Well, it's a great thing. A lot of people don't understand that the soil surface reveals to you so much of what's going on. It's there's a film out that someone put out years ago called The First Millimetre. And it's that millimetre of interaction between the atmosphere and the lithosphere. It's, what does it look like? What does it state? And then imagining what happens when a raindrop falls on that. How does that raindrop then interact with that? Because that's where all the action starts. It's one raindrop at a time, and then they all gang up together. And, well, if they can, then they can, just as they have in Europe, wreak enormous havoc. And if you're not there when that flood's happening, or the corollary of that, when the drought's happening, well, then you've got to be there and sort of go, well, I can see how this could go in one direction or another. And then more broadly, of course, is the site extends to the horizon and the shape of the land and how it's been formed, and what that story is telling you between the interaction of the geology of that landscape and what its mineral composition is, and then how that's interacted with time and the climate that's been developed. And then, what are the tree species? What are they telling you? And that's one of the wonderful things about the journey, I suppose, of experience, is that you start to read the trees and read other organisms to then tell you what the climate is like. Kind of like you're doing paleo botany or paleo anthropology, or any of those paleo enterprises or disciplines where you're there and it's live, and you're actually reconstructing, in a sense, what the whole picture is, but then what the picture of possibilities are as well. And then there's sound, the sound of the sound of your feet, largely. Unfortunately, I wear boots, so a lot of Indigenous people, First Nations people, don't wear footwear, and so there's the temperature element of that feel as well, which is something. I know Allan Savory is, that's something that he's really big on. So you'll see with a lot of videos, or when you see Allan in the field, he'll be doing it bare feet. So there's that. And then we try and build that into the understanding of others, because like I said, we largely trainers these days, or facilitators. And so having people understand that same learning. So, but they're usually only interested in their own place. So we'll say, go out and camp on it, go out and feel it, see the way the flame burns. Is it, how hard is it to light the fire? All of that sort of thing, and how it all sort of interacts. You're able to be out there when it's pissing down rain, or when it's super dry. What's happening with that? Pay attention. Run some animals through your system. All of that stuff. Which goes back, in a way, to Fukuoka, where he said, take the time, don't rush. Mollison said the same thing, and others.
So I'm hearing you saying a lot of being about your senses as the observer, as the designer. I haven't heard you say anything about going and getting tests or anything yet. It's very much about you in relationship with the land and what it is you reading. Yeah. Like understanding the language of what the soil and the trees and the ecosystem is telling you, and what its possibilities are. And that's a completely different approach from what we're hearing in where agriculture is going in a lot of other... In
high analysis. Yeah, there's a role for that.
And so how do you...
you start at the low resolution and then come on down, because you haven't even talked to the people yet. I mean, that's a whole other thing, Yeah. So you start with the landscape, and then in
working with the farming community, how are you able to communicate this as being something that is the direction to take instead of like another direction? Or is it just simply the proof in the pudding and they go, well, actually, I want that, so come along and help me?
We stopped advertising a long time ago. We stopped more or less even doing social media. I got rid of all my friends, perhaps even you. I found a bot that got rid of 5,000 friends on Facebook, because it's just all noise, and trying to be more efficient as a person. And part of that is when we come to these places is trying to frame it in a way that how can I say that just enables everything, like people come and work with us because they've heard about us. So we have the imprimatur of invitation. And like I said today in a webinar we did this morning, part of that, like people have different points at which they will transition or are causes for why they will make a transition. So if you live in town and you've had this ambition to always have a rural lifestyle or blah, 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 well, that's going to be built on something in your life that's caused that. Some agrarian vision that you have, whether you visit your grandpa or your uncle or your aunt or whatever it was. So there's that sort of category, and then there's other people who've had something go wrong, and so on. So you've either got people in a way who are coming new to a landscape or who are on an existing landscape and want to change. So both are having to go through some sort of a transition, and both have got a reason for why they've pushed the button of interest. So I find that, because the idea of proselytizing and being evangelical about that is, I could just spend a whole lot of energy doing that rather than working with people who are already at least halfway there and have gone to the trouble of saying, hey, can you come and help?
Yeah.
So that makes it a lot easier. And so what we do as a result is, the first thing is we just say, here's the world, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people doing some amazing stuff. Yes, they're doing it in a different climate or a climate that's slightly different, because that's always the thing too, especially when you're working with traditional land managers, is they'll go, oh, that won't work here because they get more rain, or that, it's always, the grass is always greener. So whatever that is. So a lot of psychology goes into this in terms of just seeing where people are at. And again, your question about going into the landscape, part of that too is, like, I'll drive up something as soon as I get to, like, I'll get to their fence. If I know it's them, I'll stop and I'll look and I'll go, and then I drive up the driveway and I can see exactly how much money they've got by the time I get to their house, or how much they've spent, or how much they've got left, right? Because I've got to, has the local produce store been the font of all land management wisdom for them, because they've sold them everything? Have they got a whole bunch of new gear? Have they got a shit ton? Is their whole place just a repository of every piece of farming equipment that's been released since the Second World War, right? It's a terrible form of judgment, but you do find yourself in that position, and that then frames where you can go from there. And I use my power with enormous respect, and because I do have power, and you've got to do that in a way that really honours the outcome, right? So I've got my outcome, but then they've got their outcome, and how are we going to come together on that? And largely I work on the belief, on the practice of self-determination, which is really what I learnt really strongly when I was working in places like Vietnam and Sri Lanka and sort of development systems, is because before that, I was the king. People would hire me, I'd come in and I'd do the master plan, I'd do it all for you. It was my plan, not yours. Yeah, I want farm forestry on your place. I'd pitch farm forestry. I want olives. I don't know. So I'd do all that, but then I realised that that's actually a shit way of going about things. And so self-determination and participatory processes are definitely the way to go, because they're much more empowering, and you'll run with it for your life, and it's yours, and you can't blame me if it all goes wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in so many different ways, it makes so much more sense. So do you have, are you training people to go out and do this work as well, or is it mostly just you training people to do the work in their own? So
what we do now is we basically do farm planning training. So we're effectively a train-the-trainer source, you might say. That's our primary product. So I've just started this week. If I could just plug a little moment this slightly. So this week we've got we've just started our 7th 13-week online farm planning program. So we've got about 400 people or so from around the world who are on that. And they're both alumni and people who are new. So we've got about 100 or so new participants. And then we've got about 300 or 400 other people who have been past participants of this program. And they continue to have access because what we're trying to build is a peer-to-peer network and peer-to-peer, social learning platform. Yeah. So with that, that means that we facilitate through the delivery of our program the sort of how to be a farm planner using our particular framework, which, as I said before, is informed by all of these other methodologies as necessary. And when they do that, then they learn how to, with a guiding hand, do a farm plan. So like when you do a PDC, a permaculture design course, or like when I did whole farm planning back in the mid-90s, it was all about, you learn how to do something, and then with guidance and assistance and facilitation from someone who's been there and done that, then you have someone to then exchange on where that's going. And so we do that quite incrementally and over a year because, again, it's too ambitious. And I found this out with a lot of permaculture work again and Keyline and other, that the idea of the master plan being able to be pulled off in one go, I think is bullshit. Mm-hmm. And I don't even use the word master planning anymore. If someone comes to me with a fully blown, beautiful plan, however it's informed, I go, yeah, really? Do you really think that's going to work? Right? Gee, you're that smart. You're going to, even, I won't say even, but, people like you and I who've had, a long period of experience and blah, blah, we realise the complexity involved, and you realise, oh, shit, I wish I hadn't done that, because your ego system's going into overdrive. I'm really glad to hear we really pull back on that and just start, try and have people focus on what the priorities are. And we do that through the lens of our layers, our platform layers. So you may need to focus completely on your family life right now, right? Because or it might be you really need to focus on the economy layer. There'll be weak links in each of the layers, and so we try and have people learn about all of that, learn how it all comes together, and learn what a transition looks like, but then also pragmatically go, actually, you need to focus on this right now, or these layers right here right now. I
was going to say, it sounds like we've both come to a similar point in terms of where we're offering things. So I offer something called the Permaculture Educators Program. So actually trying to support people to become permaculture educators, trainers, facilitators, mentors. It's a year-long process. Mm-hmm. And through that, there's a very a deep dive into many of the different areas and pulling in, I've just kind of used permaculture as a Trojan horse to be able to pack in a whole lot of other different things as well. And but I totally agree. You can't just do it's an introduction to be able to go and do an intense course. It sort of opens up a lot of doors, but to actually get into it and to be able to have the time and the spaciousness to be able to do the observation and get the information you need. So, and then also having the learning community. I think this is one of the gifts that the online world has given to us, and I think it is an absolute gift, actually, to connect people around the world in this.
It's not a gift for a sore ass, but
no, I know. but in terms of that the learning community that can be created from that, and people knowing that anytime, anywhere, they can be tapping in to this enormous wealth of knowledge and experience, and it's brilliant. Yeah,
it is. No, we're very pleased with how all of that's rolled along for us.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, you've been in this for a while now. How have you seen the shift and change in terms of growing awareness, like in the thinking, in the action, or the shift and change that you've seen in landscapes? Like, how is the regenerative agriculture movement progressing? Is it stepping forward at the pace that it needs to be, or where are you when you're thinking around that?
Well, I think it's moving ahead at the pace that whether it I think it needs to all go a lot faster than it does. I mean, there's some clearly, it seems clear to me that as Stephen J. Pine put on a podcast I listened to recently, we've moved from the Anthropocene to the Pyrocene. We've got a burning planet, and our friends, unfortunately, in Europe at the moment are finding that out, and the west coast of the US, and so on, and Canada. So. We do. I mean, fire is, and really, we don't need to be getting rid of we don't need to be combusting rapidly without biological transfer or cycling any biomass at all. We don't have that luxury. We need more biomass because the carbon cycle, there's too much carbon up there in a particular form. It needs to be in a living form down here or in a cycling form down here. So that's not happening anywhere near quickly enough. And, with agriculture being the biggest land user, and that's my pragmatism in this as well, in terms of you come back to my motivations. When I thought about it, a couple of decades ago and thought, all right, well, where can I be of most use to fulfill the core goal? It's in agriculture because it is the biggest land user and the most powerful and the most pervasive land user that there's been in the last 10,000 years. And it's been responsible for massive species destruction, and it's ultimately responsible for the society that we have, because without agricultural society, this computer doesn't exist, right? So all of that. So there's a big responsibility, but there's a big potential. So in terms of how it's all riding, the other part of the pragmatic part of the journey is that to safely navigate a transition when you look at what agriculture's primary purpose is to produce food, fibre and energy products for the world, particularly for humans, right? It's a human's food, fibre and energy supply system. And to transition immediately over to something which, throws the baby out with the bathwater, as it were. Like when I say the baby at the moment is conventional agriculture, to do that really rapidly. Look, there's a lot of possibility on that front, but then we're dealing with humans. And humans all have just stuff like different debt to equity ratios. It's like this core stuff that makes up the complexity of human life, and you can't just go and click a finger when you've got really bad debt, and so on. So if you've got bad debt and a landscape which is in bad debt, then that's not necessarily a fast way out. Now, that's not to say that if you change the financial circumstances with a bit of impetus and help, then the land part is the fast part, I would say, because we see this time and time again. The human part is a lot more complex and slower to sort of move than the land part, which is there's a lot of upside on, and we see that all the time. I was just working with Leanne and Barry O'Sullivan up in who are inland from Bowen in North Queensland, and they've got like 32,000 hectares. I first became aware of them at a grazing conference that I spoke at in Emerald in southeast of Queensland. And that was awesome. And I met them and I watched their presentation. I was like, wow, because they use ultra-high density grazing. So they've got 5,000 head of cattle, and they didn't always do it that way, but they had their animals everywhere like everyone does. But they put all their animals into 5,000 head unit, and then they move them around multiple times a day. So it's like the wildebeest on the Serengeti. And they do that, and the place has just gone boom. And it's just been 1 year that they've gone, one season of management change. But, I've got so many examples like that in the livestock world or whatever else. And then you come down and you look at, people who are doing a similar thing of changing practice with biointensive gardens and, all of that. There's a lot of that, but you've got to be, as a human, you've got to be in the right moment to do that. You've got to have the circumstances that kind of provide for that, because a lot of people are just in survival mode. Mm-hmm. They haven't got to the point where they can shift into thriving mode. Sometimes it takes a little bit to get beyond where you are, and so you've got to be. And that's so I often say you've got to be you've got to be pragmatic, incremental, and frugal at times in order to be able to get past where you are, which is a self-responsibility pathway. And then once you get to that, then you can start to spread your wings but eye on the goal, but that'll take a different set of steps for different people.
I wonder whether there's some things that you've noticed that consistently help people to get unstuck. I know it's different in every single context, but what are some of the unstuck from a landscape level? What are some of those initial triggers to get out of that landscape debt, and at the same time
Well, I think it still starts with the human, because it's generally for me, and this is at least what I see as a general pattern, is that the debt that you are in, whether it's a social debt, it might be a self-debt, you need to stand and look in the mirror. Like I say to people, be an adult, because I'm working primarily in adult education, you might say, or adult support, is what do you want out of this life? What gets you out of bed in the morning? Look at those core motivations for your being and sort of reset on that front, and then let's go from there. Because if you haven't given yourself if you haven't self-loved enough to be able to do that, to realise that you're a perennial species, even if you abuse yourself terribly, you tend to live for a fair while. My mother smokes a pack of cigarettes a day and she's 75. It's like, fucking hell, how's that happen, so it's like you're here for a while, so put a bit of effort in, right? And if you come to me or us and say, oh, look, I want to do X, Y, and Z, well, that's fine, but let's look at you first and see where your capabilities are right now, so that we can then have you address the capabilities that your landscape currently has, and let's go together. Because if you don't, you'll be out before you know it. So you've really got to get your shit together personally and within your family, or whatever the compact is that you have around you. Get all of that together, because you would well know that I know all of the relationships that have suffered in my time, and there's a few of them, have been because of a lack of clarity. And that's clarity from me, and it's clarity from them, and it's clarity together. And if you don't get that going from the outset, what sort of connectivity and clarity are you going to have with the landscape that's going to be able to carry it on? Yeah. So the other thing too you asked is, about do I see much of a change going on? Oh, hell yeah, there's a lot going on. I mean, I subscribe to all of let's say all, but a huge number of conventional agricultural journals and all of that sort of thing. And I dance those two worlds, and there's that sort of side is moving. That's a really, really conservative, rigid, and dominant side, orthodoxy, that is moving. And there's been a lot of push factors for that. Climate is a really big one. But also, the other thing that's clear to me is that the dominant player in the world of agriculture is the consumer. Like if you look at the US, last time I counted, there was 125 consumers to every full-time agriculture is my primary profession farmer in the United States, right? So that means that the consumer has a lot of power to drive what kind of production system that producer will have. So at the moment, they support a production system which produces ethanol, high fructose corn syrup, and all of the soya derivatives. and CAFO beef and CAFO, confined animal feedlot operations. So that's what they support right now. They could just the same start to support a different pathway, which would then require those farmers to then produce in a different way. So that's largely why we do the sort of awareness stuff that we do. Like when we produced the Polyfaces film, it had the very explicit purpose, and I don't want to be binary about this, but to convert the American soccer mum.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way we looked at it is that she is they are, however they're framed, the most powerful consumer on this planet, because their decision-making then influences agricultural policy in the most dominant agricultural nation of the world and the most dominant scientific nation of the world, which then goes on from there.
It's interesting that you say that, because I was going to ask you whether you felt that there was a need to do advocacy to get policy shift at a government level to help.
Absolutely. So we can only bite off so much.
I guess it's both. And you were saying you need to shift the thinking at a community level, but simultaneously work at that level. So is that anything that you've been able to talk?
Yeah, definitely.
What needs to happen at that level? What is the message that needs to be shared, and what can be done to help amplify that message?
Well, I think the pathways are pretty well the same. I mean, we're working on an MOU with the state of Veracruz and the federal government of Mexico at the moment, right? And which is really exciting. Mm. They really like our platform. They really like this. I mean, Mexico is one of those. I love Mexico. I don't know how much time you've spent there, but it's one of my favourite places in the world. I love everyone thinks of Mexico differently, but if you've been there and you know it pretty well, it's like the place with one of the most highest upsides of any place on the planet. It's just amazing. And, their political class and the emerging political class, they're looking at that as like they're finally getting their Mexico back in a way after, the multilateral struggles that have followed from NAFTA and all of those sorts of, debilitating and neo-colonial policies that have been inflicted upon them. So they're finally getting that back, and they're kind of going, okay, here we have this amazing country. What can we do? And they're looking both inwards and outwards to try and do that. So that will take time to develop a whole range of policy frameworks which will support that. Which is part of what we're talking about. But where we're starting is where we always start: self-determined. Mm-hmm. To me, it doesn't matter what level you are. You've got to get your own sovereignty, to use that term, your own personal sovereignty, and then build that up without being nationalistic. Certainly be patriotic, but not nationalistic about it, and realise that there's a lot that you can do. So self-determine, get your own sovereignty, and then have a participatory process. Mm-hmm. And that might take time, but that's what it will be. And that self-determination will then roll over into either individual landholders or collections of landholders, like in Landcare is a great example, and other frameworks like that, where people are coming together, they're looking at stuff within a catchment level or a bioregional level and sort of identifying the issues, identifying the opportunities, and then directing policy and support frameworks which would then help them to get where they want to go. And there's no, oh yeah, just give them this and it'll be all right. It's a journey. I mean, what we find will work now, and what will take us through a first set of transitions will then lead to something else that we need to support or build on. Otherwise. So there's a lot of that. I found back when Rudd was the Prime Minister here in Australia in 2010, when we had the Regen Ag thing going, the climate change mitigation strategy had this, it was called Farm Ready program. And the Farm Ready program we used pretty heavily. I think we had 800 places supported, I think at $1,500 a pop for different farmers to come and do this series of Regen Ag programs. And they were enormously powerful. So there's just so many, like, education is a good starting point, but then you've got to have other things along the way. And it's sort of okay that you can go along like that, but then if you don't have the market conditions to support and the regulatory conditions that support particular pathways forward, then that can make it difficult. So, this sort of idea of us all being able to have on-farm processing and on-farm, farm to plate sort of value chain support and everything. That's a whole of government thing, because once you open the lid open the door on the regulatory phase of that, and then you start to realise the slowness of institutional change.
Have you seen COVID
and the
change?
Process that goes through all of that, and that does happen. We've been involved with that with that change, but by goodness, you've got to put the effort in. And you've got to park other things that you might really want to do while you're doing that, because it's an all in. Whether it's going to the feds or the state or the local council, or however you do it. Anyone who's in that change agency work, it's why people have to be good citizens, because you can't just leave it to a few individuals to do it all the time.
And I think that's it, isn't it, really? It's like stepping up in the capacity that you can, where you can, in whichever organisations you feel like you can, and that each of those changes or voices makes a difference to the whole. It makes it easy for people who are doing it at the Fed level and all of that. So I think, however you can step up and speak up. I like that, being good citizens. My question I was just trying to throw in there in the middle was, like, have you noticed that COVID has changed anything for the conversation that you're having with people?
Well, we were already online, so that helped. Zoom, people said, have you heard of this Zoom thing? I said, yeah, I've had it for about 4 years, actually. So I started giving Zoom lessons. No, it's when we've checked in with our membership, at least, which we've done a number of times, we did so, I think. Well, COVID really hit the world, I'd say early March last year was when it really kicked in, and people realised that this was something that was going to be quite powerful. I think we checked in around April or May, and we had a lot of people coming in who were direct marketers and that sort of thing, and they were saying, oh, look, this has been the best thing since sliced bread. It's been amazing. So looking at it quite selfishly from a market access point of view. But then as it's sort of bitten on, then the human side of it's come on, because, rolling lockdowns that people have been in. And so there's been a lot of, I think it's been a really positive thing from a social growth perspective. People have started to, I remember, what was his name? It was the Patrick who wrote the Permaculture book in the UK. What was
Whitefield.
Patrick Whitefield. God bless his soul. I was listening to him at a thing that I was at in Germany years ago, and he was saying how he felt that, and it was not long before he died, and he said that where he's got to is he's realised that humans have to realise that they're not going to be able to be independent anymore. And this was like, I'm going to say this was 2011. Yeah, it was the year my grandmother died. And I thought that they're going to have to realise that interdependence is, because it's energy, it's fossil energy and this abundance that we currently enjoy that actually supports that possibility. Mm-hmm. And, in this case, it's actually been COVID, a pandemic that's proven that the weakness of independence.
Yeah.
because now people realise, well, they got forced independence where you're alone as a social organism. Yeah, that doesn't work. So we found a lot of stuff out about that, I think, and that's been really positive. So it's easier, I think, in some ways for us to talk about what Mollison might have called the woo-woo stuff a bit. And not hard woo-woo, but, softer woo-woo.
Well, you're right. It's just easier to have conversations about stuff that you wouldn't normally have. And I think that's really...
Which I think there's a lot of upside on. That's great.
Yeah, you're right. So just one or two more questions. One was about, you talked before about the people that inspired you as you were growing the way that you're thinking. Is there anyone that you're looking to now or that you see around you that's just like these points of inspiration as well that you think, oh, that's new and interesting? I'm connecting in with that more recently.
I suppose there's a few people. Zach Bush, who's become a friend, is one person. I really like his outlook and he's such a positive force. John Kempf is another person because of his incredible intellect, and he's got a company called Advancing Eco Agriculture and the Kind Harvest platform. And an Amish gentleman who's just this soils genius. I just love the way he thinks and how brilliant his brain is. And Nicole Masters, I really love the way that she works, and one of the best communicators I've seen of anybody in being able to, again, deal with the sort of operational complexity of commercial agroecologies, and making pathways for people which are successfully transitioned. So people like that. But then, there's just individuals and families that I come across in our membership. The Burt family in Western Australia, who've been really wonderful to us in supporting what we do, and just this outlook is like there's there's high net worth people, some of their outlook, but then there's other people like. We've got several people that we work with in places, again, like Mexico, and Benjamin Saleh in Somaliland, who's doing the most amazing job with sheep on a small farm in rural Somaliland in the bloody Horn of Africa desert. And he's just so excited about all these grasses that no one's seen forever, and species and blah. People like that give me incredible inspiration as far as the pathways of possibility, and and the smiles it brings to them and the ones that are around them. I think that's pretty awesome. Yeah. So but in the broader scheme, there's nothing really that's like, there's no big leaps going forward. There's no new Keyline, or there's no new permaculture, or there's no one who's really, I think it's all incremental, and that's cool. Yeah. Because I think that, as we know, Martin Mulligan's book, Ecological Pioneers, I think was a really good one that a lot of people don't know about, because it really created the frame for the personality type that goes with that kind of innovation, that pulse of innovation. And there's a bit of carnage that often goes with that because of the personality type. So I think it's a better space in time, again, for us to move, as I said a couple of times, from the ego system to the ecosystem, and realising our potential is that. And, so for a lot of us who are better enabled, that aren't featured in Martin's book for a good reason, it's a good place to be. Yeah, and that's So it's like this. We're incremental, not in the pulse. Although there's pulses of interruption and disruption that we're feeling.
Yeah, and the final question was really about, how do people find out more about the work that you do? What are the links that you'd like to share so people can follow up?
Well, just the Regrarians. if you search Regrarians on Google or whatever your search engine is, we've pretty well dominated it. So it's
sure. Easy to find. So I'll put all the links down below, and I'll try and scan through this conversation as well for the people that you mentioned and the books that you mentioned, so I can pop some links to those down as well.
Thank you. Regrarians.org is where we've got that's our entree, our font, and
also the Polyfaces film.
Yeah, the Polyfaces film is it's a beautiful film. It's got a high level of currency. It's just a beautiful story about a family on a journey, and it's not the journey that everyone should follow, but it does. It's like when I actually came up with the idea and the treatment before people more capable actually made it into something. But my original intent with that was the treatment that I wrote was I wanted to combine the sort of narrative of Australian story, an Australian ABC show, in which usually rural people's lives, remarkable or otherwise, have been depicted, and that really shows the personal narrative of their story and journey. And I really enjoy that, and a lot of people do. And then combine that with really good cinematography, really good film values and whatnot, which so many of us are capable of now, thanks to the technology that's more broadly available. And I think we pulled that off pretty well. And that was, again, because what we saw in the genre of agricultural, permacultural, regenerative agricultural films that are out there, it was all just talking heads. And that's pretty boring, really. I'd turn off pretty quick. I know a lot of others do. And we didn't see anyone really telling stories, human stories. In fact, the Seletons were a bit disappointed when they saw Polyfaces in a way, because they thought we were going to do an instructional video. I thought, that's a bit boring. That's a bit naff. For us, because we understand with our work that it's a human journey, and whether it's you deciding as a consumer, as a person who lives in town, deciding how you're going to live your life and what you're going to ingest and what you're going to rub on yourself and wash your place with and all the rest of it, how important that was to then being a producer, what sort of production systems might you run? So, it's a great piece. We really love it.
Wasn't your family quite involved in that whole process too, wasn't it?
Yeah, they all grew up on the screen, which is cool.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But now we all work together. We've got a restaurant here in Castlemaine, restaurant cafe called Creamtown, which is where I'm sitting. I'm in we've got a collab sort of working space. So I'm in a little corner here, which is my entree.
What was the name of the cafe again?
Creamtown.
Creamtown.
Yeah, so our eldest daughter, who's 28, Isabella, and our middle daughter is Pearl, and Zane, our son, our youngest, who's just turned 20, they own it and lease it from Regrarian. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
So, and that's, it's all organic and biodynamic, local. It's great, so I never suffer from a good feed.
I can imagine. It's a very dangerous spot to have an office.
It's about expression again, there's people don't know unless they know. So, it's
and you've got to make it
points
accessible and delicious and appealing in all the different facets. Yeah. Well, thanks, Darren, for taking the time to chat with me today.
Oh, please.
It's been really great.
Thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And lovely to see your face. I won't. I'll remember it again this time. Yeah. We probably only just said hello. It was an in passing thing, but your influence and the work that you do is just so important in the permaculture world. It's looked to as being such. When you think about big landscapes, everything points towards the work that you're doing. So, just thank you. Yeah, well, which is lovely. But I think, it's always, my role in this is really just to help others. I mean, what I do would be nothing without the people who are out there every day doing the work. So it's really all credit to them. Just a bit of a means on the way, I suppose. But thank you. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's wonderful, and I appreciate all the work that you and your family are doing as well.
Thanks, Darren. All right, take care. Enjoy your lunch. I guess you're going to have.
I'm going to go and reveal to myself that I am actually an upright ape and stand up. So.
Thank you. All right, take care. See you.
Thank you. Hooroo.
Bye. So that's all for today. Thanks so much for joining me. If you'd like a copy of my top 10 books to read, click the link below, pop in your email, and I'll send it straight to you. You can also watch this interview over on my YouTube channel. I'll put the link below as well. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and if you've enjoyed it, please consider giving me a star rating. Believe it or not, the more people do this, the more podcast bots will discover this little podcast. So thanks again, and I'll see you again next week.